primera la que me dijiste y la segunda la de reporting figures, ¿no?
Sí, exacto.
Vale. Empezamos ahí. Okay, good morning and welcome to the Spanish Pavilion and to this very exciting session which is titled Fostering Adaptation to Climate Change, Exploring Innovative Financing Options. And well, since I'm moderating this panel, that means I am the least important person here. So I think all the focus should be on ladies and gentlemen to my left, because they are the experts and the ones that are going to deliver the punchlines that are needed in this topic. Well, obviously we're not going to talk about the trillions that are needed in order to finance climate change mitigation projects, adaptation projects, and so on. But I think we can all agree, as a basis to begin with, that, and this is partly the fault of financiers such as ourselves. Climate change mitigation is very sexy. We all want to be financing renewables all around the world. We're all crazy about green hydrogen. We all want to have that in our portfolios. But adaptation is it's, let's say, a little bit less sexier in terms of business development options for banks, for funds, and for long-term financiers. So there's at least a significant amount of blame to be laid at our doors. But the reality is we've got to look for projects in adaptation. We've got to make it present in our or a very important part of our asset allocation strategies, and that at the moment isn't there. And that's a reality from my point of view and from my perspective. Anyway, we've got a magnificent panel comprising of the following speakers. Elena Viñas, which is the chair of the EU Platform of Sustainable Finance, and an old friend of ours. Franco Pizza, the head of Sustainable Area at Bancolombia. Sean Kidney, which is the CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative, and Roman Royal, climate change specialist at the European Investment Bank. So, ladies and gentlemen, the agenda is as follows. I'm going to I'm going to give you the word for a 3-minute presentation of each one of you, your institution, and your the persons or the purpose of your presence here. Just introduce yourselves in 3 minutes, and then, if you don't mind, we'll go to a round table in which I will be asking a number of questions out of you. So, in 3 minutes, Elena, please introduce yourself.
I think I'm going to be briefer than 3 minutes. My name is Elena Viñas. I'm chair of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance. I'm also commissioner of the Spanish Financial Markets Authority, and a member of the UN Secretary General's High-Level Expert Group on Net Zero pledges. Now, the reason why I'm here is with my EU hat as chair of the Platform on Sustainable Finance, because our number one goal is to develop and help the implementation of the EU taxonomy. The EU Platform Sustainable Finance, for those who do not know it, it's the official advisory group to the European Commission to advise on the development, I said, of the taxonomy, but also the wider sustainable finance framework. Now, the EU taxonomy, to cut a long story short, is like a dictionary that tells you which economic activities can be deemed sustainable and under which circumstances. Now, in order to be deemed sustainable, you need to be able to contribute significantly to one of the 6 environmental objectives. And one of those environmental objectives is climate change adaptation, and that's the reason why I'm here.
Fantastic. That was less than 3 minutes, Elena. Thank you very much. And now, Franco, the floor is yours. 3 minutes, please.
Rafael, thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here. I'm Franco Pisa. I am the responsible for the sustainability strategy at Bancolombia Group, which is the largest financial institution in Colombia, and we have presence in Central America, in Panama, Guatemala, and El Salvador. I am a member of the different strategic or steering committees of GFANS, GISD, and also in UNEP-FI. My role here is to understand clear the next level of advance, or which next steps for financial sector globally. And as a member too of the global advisory experts from financial sector, working with SBTI in order to define the right way for financial institutions in the net zero step way. This is a complex moment, but also are full of opportunities for emerging markets and developing economies. I came from Latin America, and Latin America also are facing really big challenges linked with the climate agenda, but at the same time, is offering a huge opportunity to the world in order to offsetting or working together in a new opportunity for natural capital, how to, with this specific opportunity, solve different social and human problems that we are arising in the region. Thank you, Rafael.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Franco. Very, very interesting. And we're going to ask you a little bit more. We're going to pick your brain on a couple of things you've said, if you don't mind. Sean, please, 3 minutes.
Sean Kidney, CEO of the Climate Bonds Initiative. We're an international organisation been driving the green bonds market from 2 billion to 4.3 trillion now, including Bank of Colombia.
Thank you.
It's been the inaugural issuer in the Colombian market. But of course, also including the European Investment Bank, who issued the world's very first climate awareness bond in 2007. But also driving global taxonomy development. In 2012, we launched the IDEA CBI. We convinced the Chinese People's Bank of China in 2014 to do one, and then I've been part of numerous expert groups with Helena, driving the development of the European taxonomy. In adaptation, where we've seen already some bonds issued, we're focused on bonds that are adaptation related. The Netherlands sovereign bond was for coastal protection measures Netherlands, the first one, 10 billion. But we've seen them also from San Francisco, public utilities, Cape Town water and so on. They've been physical. We are now working, and we have published early this year a framework paper with UN Disaster Risk Relief on extending the conversation on resilience into social, economic, nature-based resilience, not just physical. And this is because climate is going to get crazy now. We're heading into a century of volatility. We're going to get crisis after crisis after crisis. Yes, we have to prepare for the physical side of it, storms, floods, droughts, etc. But we also need to prepare for the social and economic consequences. If we don't recover quickly, our countries will implode. And that becomes something we need to understand. This will be mapping across the SDGs as well, because when you think about how do we make sure Colombia is resilient in the face of climate impact, Colombia also needs to be wealthier and more able to fund activities the next morning. And that's part of the resilience agenda going forward.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sean. And also, more on that on the next few minutes. And lastly, but not least, Roman, please introduce yourself in 3 minutes.
Thank you. Roman Röhr from the European Investment Bank. I'm a climate change specialist at the bank. For those of you who don't know the EIB, it's the European lending arm. It's one of the largest multilateral lenders and a very large provider of climate finance. So my role is in the climate policy office of the bank. So we are setting standards, we are implementing the EU taxonomy, we are setting targets for the bank, and we are supporting basically from a technical side, originating projects and promoting adaptation finance. Yeah,
Fantastic.
That's why I'm here.
Thank you very much. So we've got a full menu ahead of us. We're going to talk about adaptation, taxonomies, standard setting, bonds, origination of deals in transition. So it's something I cannot think of a better way to spend a Sunday before lunch than doing these things together with you. So and let me also just for housekeeping issues, Gunther Tallinger will be giving a special address for the last 10 minutes of this session, tailor-made or specifically catering adaptation and the assurance, the worldwide assurance sector, which is the hot potato in the soup. So let's start. And first question to Elena, because she's on my left, and because she's the one that knows the most about taxonomy. At least the person I know that is the most savvy on taxonomy. And the question is very simple, Elena, and I think it is very, very simple indeed. Taxonomy and adaptation. How does it fit in?
Yes. So the EU taxonomy includes adaptation in 3 ways. Let me start it by the first one and most important, is that the taxonomy incorporates the measures taken on adaptation by valuing them as measures invested in or taken in. Let me explain how it works. So I was explaining at the very beginning that the taxonomy, in order for an economic activity to be part of the taxonomy, needs to contribute significantly to one of the 6 environmental objectives without harming significantly to any of the other 5. Now, adaptation is particular in quite a few manners, but one of the main reasons why it's particular is because adaptation is the criteria that has been set up is process-based. So when you look at mitigation, we set up criteria like thresholds, quantitative, wherever possible, right? But adaptation is a process, yeah? And what the taxonomy says is that in order for an activity or an asset to be adapted, then it needs to respond to, number one, has there been made an assessment on what are the physical risks, the physical risks that that activity faces? Number two, have there been identified any material physical risk? And if yes, then it has been developed a plan to mitigate that risk, and have been the measures being taken in. Now, the taxonomy is particular, adaptation is particular, because when you have invested in adapted an activity, you do not become taxonomy aligned from a revenues perspective, but it is your investments that are taken into account. So that means the CAPEX, the capital expenditure that you invested, or the operational expenditures. And if you're a public sector, your investments. Yeah? And that makes the activity adapted. Now, the second way that includes, the taxonomy includes adaptation, is by recognizing the enabling activities, that is, the activities that help others to adapt. And in that case, you count the revenue. So, for example, let me give you an example for both. So, on one hand, we could say the transport system, should be adapted. One way that you can adapt roads, it's by and now I'm trying to remember exactly all the criteria, is flattening the side slopes, so that helps. Or it could be by planting trees, that helps to stabilize the road, right? So if you make that investment, your road would be adapted. But on the opposite, it is the construction company or the consultant that helps to adapt that road that can count the revenues, because it's part of their activity to adapt, an asset. Now, the third way that it includes, and this is very important to understand in my personal opinion, is because for any activity to be considered taxonomy aligned to any of the other environmental objectives, so let's imagine power generation, to mitigation, you need to comply with the do no significant harm to the other environmental objectives, one of them being adaptation. So what does mean, what is the do no significant harm of linked to adaptation? Well, it is also process-based, and it is it's what it says is that there's been a physical risk assessment done, and that the physical risks, material physical risks, have been identified. So the main difference between the significant contribution and the do no significant harm is that one not only has identified them, but has actually developed a plan to implement them and implement them. The other is just that you are in the process, right? That you have at least identified those risks. And that's how the taxonomy includes or addresses adaptation. Why the last one is so important? Because it basically acts as an incentive for all the activities to adapt themselves. Now, where we are, and this is what it also, if you follow the trend of thought of how the taxonomy works, means that the activities that can be adapted are those, for the time being, that are included in the taxonomy. Now, many of you would know that the taxonomy is quite advanced and really developed. We have 243 activities included, if I recall correctly. That's about 1/3 of the NAICS codes for those that are, for the geeks in the room. But you need to take into account that there are many activities like cinema, theater, and all of that, right? So the gross of the economy, but there are many important activities, like, for example, from mining to let's say, basic research and development that have not yet been included, that we're working on, which means that as we finish the taxonomy, the gross part of the economy would be able to adapt, yeah? With one exception, which is those activities that would never contribute to one of the environmental objectives or will never harm any of the environmental objectives. And that's why the platform has been calling and has been advising the European Commission to say, look, once it's finalized, what we need is to develop technical criteria, general do no significant harm criteria, so all the activities in the economy, except those that have no place in a 2050 net zero economy, can be adapted.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So basically, I heard that one of the key words you said was incentives. So it's setting a logical framework for incentives for market participants to promote adaptation projects. So, no, fantastic.
Yes, and can I just say, I think that one of the particularities as well of adaptation is that the very few economic activities, profitable economic activities, that they are geared to enable adaptation, right? One example would be drought-resistant, seeds, for example, and research on that. Another one would be, flooding mappings, and certain type of consultant services. But they're very few, and that is one of the key issues of adaptation.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Elena. More later, if you don't mind, because a number of things I want to ask you. But since you all fellows are very chatty, please make it a maximum of 4 minutes in your replies, please, because otherwise they're going. I'm going to be blamed for the time, for the management of the time. Franco, I think you said something very interesting before, and in your introduction, and it's a question of, well, it is crystal clear. I mean, if developed nations and OECD countries account for, and China and the United States and so on account for, I don't know, ballpark figure, 70% of global emissions, and the emerging economies account for around 15%, obviously the brunt of the blame in terms of finance, or in terms of supplying finance, shouldn't rest on emerging economies. So Bancolombia, as one of Colombia's main banks, I think it's uniquely positioned to shed some light on the challenges of adaptation finance in emerging markets. Can you talk us through these challenges in Colombia and other emerging Latin economies at large? What is your view on financing transition projects in emerging nations?
Perfect, Rafael. One of the most important issues in financial sector is that we are managing risks. This is the core of our activities. How to understand clear the economy, how to figure out the opportunities, and how to support our customers on them. And mitigation, as you was telling, is so sexy. It's, the business case is ready, and you are mobilizing a lot of resources on this. One of the main challenges in adaptation is that point, that has limited resources for those kind of projects, because in some cases the business case is not fixed right now. But how to support, the consideration here is how this could improve other activities, and how to manage this as a less risk in the implementation of any activity on that. Okay, the economy in the region is also another issue, because not just after pandemic, but many countries in Latin America are depending on agriculture, and it's one of the biggest sector, or the impact of in this sector is so big for climate change. How to deal with this is something relevant for the region. Linked with less access from SMEs to those kind of resources. This is something that is not in the conversation right now, that does level of technique. Okay, any SME is talking about adaptation. It's talking about how to survive for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, and this is a conception in long term, and they consider that in many cases is the responsible for adaptation is the government. No private, no financial, no them. But how to implement this in those activities. And finally, infrastructure is so poor in the region. And it's not in order to improve the economy and the opportunities, but climate change is impacting in a huge way all the infrastructure in the region. How to deal with, how to define new opportunities on this market is something relevant. And financial sector, not just banks, insurers, my friend here, are dealing with this, and how to solve different problems supporting with a new approach of these economies.
Yeah.
Government needs to define clearly those kind of activities, and we are ready because we have right now different solutions on this, but maybe for the next point of the conversation we could offer a better overview of this.
Fantastic, Franco. What is the SMEs in Colombia? How much do they account for in terms of GDP and unemployment around?
80% of the employment is linked with SMEs in the countries.
Yeah. No, and obviously,
it's similar in different countries in Latin America. It's a region of SMEs, but are really not connected with this agenda in the basis point.
No, exactly. And then we come again to incentives, as Elena has said. No,
for sure.
It's other side of the same discussion or the same thematic. Sean, to you. Well, the Climate Bonds Initiative is one of the main international standard setters in terms of green and sustainable finance and issuance of bonds and so on and so on. For instance, for a bank in Colombia or a multilateral development bank or a sovereign wealth fund, if it wants to issue a thematic bond, what tools and instruments are there for those institutions to step up adaptation finance?
Well, I think there's two different kinds of questions there. First is what kind of finance can be raised, and then second is how do you manage the nature of the investments on the ground? Look, when it comes down to adaptation resilience, the larger chunk of funding is going to be public sector, 60, 70%. Now this is, all we're talking about is changing the procurement requirements of expenditures at the public sector level. If you're investing in a water utility, of course you have to be addressing mitigation now, energy efficiency, but you also have to be addressing adaptation. If you haven't got a robust catch-up management plan that looks at changes in rainfall over the next 15 years, we have a lot of data now on that, then you're missing a trick. It's a default risk. And I think the important thing about what Franco was saying is that when we come down to adaptation and resilience, in a way it's a lot easier than mitigation, because fundamentally it's about reducing risk going forward. Now, for investors, it's about when they are making investments, taking into account some new factors that we are forced to now address with, which is the changing climate and the reverberations of that change. We have to understand that physical changes in climates, like stronger hurricanes, don't just lead to having to rebuild the wharves of Acapulco. We also have to, and if you saw the videos of Acapulco's hurricane recently, they really were horrific.
Yeah.
You have to deal with the social dimension and the economic dimension to resilience. Otherwise, you've missed the trick around future default risk. So how do we deal with those sort of things is really all we're talking about. And then if you are dealing with those sort of things, you of course just become an issuer.
Yeah.
We will see a lot more green sovereign bonds, resilience sovereign bonds to address these issues, like the Netherlands government has already done around physical adaptation. That will be in emerging markets a dominant theme. Emerging markets are, let's be clear, the victims of this largely, right? They are the ones, the rest of the world is polluted and they're having to deal with the consequences.
Completely
And
agree.
they're already being downgraded by S&Ps, Moody's and Fitches because of increased risk. Steps they can take to mitigate that risk need to be recognised, rewarded in capital markets going forward. And that's what we're going to see this coming year.
Fantastic. So I think you're very positive on the long-term view of especially dedicated thematic bonds, exclusively dedicated to adaptation as a product, as an asset class, which I completely agree with you. And you said something very interesting about, I think you named it, robust strategic adaptation plans for entities. I think
that's the tricky part.
Yeah, that's difficult.
We need guidance here.
Yeah, we've got a lot of homework.
It is, but of course, in the European taxonomy, we've already required you to address these issues.
Yeah.
That's not enough, let's be clear. And the European taxonomy is not a finished piece, it's subject to continual work. We're working at the moment with UN Disaster Risk and Relief on further guidance for what is an appropriate adaptation and resilience activity or plan in the context of the severity of climate change we now understand is coming through. 1.5 degrees will be here in the next few years, and that means a very different scenario about resilience going forward. So this is an evolving area, but let's be clear, it's a critical area. From an investor's perspective, they are now forced to start addressing the issue of how to reduce their forward default risk over a medium term, not just the longer term, because of the impacts we're feeling.
Yes, I suspect you might be spot on. So, Roman, VIB, Europe's Climate Bank, we're all very, we follow it quite a lot, and it is an institution that I hold very close to my heart because I had a lot of experience with it in the past. And the EIB has a clearly defined target in terms of climate action and sustainability, which must account for 50% of its overall lending activity from 2025 onwards. How does adaptation finance fit in this overall strategy? What's the story of adaptation and adaptation finance at the EIB?
Thanks for that question. So you mentioned the target, and we have created a dedicated target and included it in this overall target, dedicated for adaptation finance, to really send out a strong signal that the EIB is very interested in ramping up adaptation finance. So we have basically decided to target 15% of all our climate finance to go to adaptation projects by 2025. And
15.
And it may not sound so much. 15 is not a very large number, but for us it basically means a tripling of everything we're doing in adaptation in just a few years. So as an institution, it's a really big change in the bank.
Give us euros. They're a big bank. How much euros?
We are lending around 60 billion every year. 50% will be for climate action and sustainable environmental sustainability, and of that we're targeting 15% for adaptation. So that's a floating target because every year our lending really changes from year to year, but it's substantial. So it'll be between 5 and 10 billion every year that we can allocate until 2025, which is around the corner. And we will look into how that goes, how we perform, and how also the demand is increasing. As Sean said, we're already seeing an uptake, and then we'll be looking into these things when we review our targets after 2025. But it's really ambitious for the bank. You said adaptation is easier than mitigation. I'm not sure everybody agrees with that because standardization is not there, building codes are not there, engineering practice is not there. The taxonomy is extremely useful to teach us a common language around these things, to originate the projects and report them, get them audited and scale them up. But there's a lot of capacity building to be done across the market, across our public sector clients as well. But we'll talk about this later, I think. So the bank has the target, but we are planning a lot more to do, and happy to speak about that as well.
Fantastic, Roman. No, well, that's a very lofty objective. 15% times 3 what you finance in adaptation projects, and not financing, not the easy part, which is basic infrastructure projects such as roads and airports, etc., which account for significant chunks of asset allocation. So it's very, very lofty, and congratulations. And I'd love to ask you the same question in 3 years' time. Let's see. Okay, Elena, back to you. And please don't kill myself. Don't kill me. I'm just a messenger. Second round, 3 minutes per question. Don't hate me, but they're already throwing me dark looks because we're lagging a little bit behind. Elena, taxonomy, reporting figures. I understand that we've got a first year the reporting figures for the first year of application of taxonomy for European institutions and from corporate especially. What can you tell us about adaptation finance, and what are the punchlines in those figures?
Yes, I'll try to summarize it in 3 minutes. Okay, I'll try to be diligent. I would like first to build on what Sean said, because it's really important. One of the main problems with adaptation, what we call, a common friend of ours, Nancy Syke, always calls the younger sister, right? The one that's never been invited to the party, right? And never gets invited to the party. And one of the key issues is that there's no business case. You mentioned it, Franco, right? What the taxonomy does is bring the business case. And let me very quickly give you an example. Imagine you are a steel manufacturer, right? And you have 2 plants, and you want one of them, one of them is taxonomy alignment. They are aligned from a revenue perspective. It meets the criteria for mitigation. The other one doesn't. Yeah. But I, as the CEO, imagine I have commanded or commissioned a physical risk assessment of my 2 plants. Imagine is the second one, the one that is not taxonomy aligned, that is in a risk flooding area, right? Then when I develop my CapEx plan, right, for my company, I would include the investments that I need to make to adapt that plant. Now, what the taxonomy allows you for the very first time is that all those investments, all that capital expenditure can be called green, can be taxonomy aligned. And why is that so important? Because then they can go to a bank and say, hello, can you help me to issue an adaptation green bond? And that adaptation green bond will have the stamp and hopefully will meet the criteria of the EU green bond standard. And because financial market participants in Europe are obliged to report on the taxonomy alignment from a revenue and a CapEx perspective of all their funds that they are marketed as having environmental characteristics or an environmental sustainable investment objective, and that is today 56% of the entire market, you can start imagining, the interest of those financial market participants, the demand on taxonomy aligned financial instruments, and that's how it works. But not only I can issue a green bond on adaptation, but my equity and my general purpose bonds will have 2 figures attached to them: the revenue alignment, in this case for the revenues that generated from my first plant, but equally the CapEx alignment. And they, for the very first time in Europe, they will be able to create financial products based on CapEx, which brings to the table the transition question. Yeah. Now, to cut another long story short, we had for the very first time the first reporting on taxonomy alignment in Europe. There were 1,900 companies that were asked, the first round asked to report, and the numbers actually are very encouraging overall because they're higher than expected. Even on revenues, but particularly higher on CapEx. Now, the bad news is that what we have discovered when it comes to adaptation is that a lot of companies have only concentrated on their contribution to mitigation, keeping adaptation. The French AMF, the Supervisory Financial Markets Authority, analyzed 31 companies. Of them, none of them had really contributed to adaptation. Number 2, there's still a misunderstanding in the industry exactly how adaptation works, and I think we take that back at the EU platform. We need to be better at communicating how it works, because some have counted the revenues generated once adapted, and we just said you can only count the investment. So much more of learning. We're in the learning curve. We need to explain exactly how adaptation works in practice so companies can analyze the adaptation objective, but also can report properly on it. But overall, I think it's really encouraging to see that the CapEx figures are so much more higher. That means that companies, and I know this is about mitigation, but companies are actually investing in becoming taxonomy aligned, in transitioning, because guess what? From the sectors that have the highest percentage of CapEx alignment are on energy, utilities, the high impact sectors, including automobiles, real estate and construction.
Oh, fantastic. And I think you were very brilliant in your summary, in which taxonomy at the end of the day offers it's an instrument, it's a tool for what precisely Sean said, to create robust adaptation plans.
Exactly.
And then to go to people like COFIDES, the EIB or Bancolombia, and get a ticket or get finance. So it's
Absolutely, because it works on both the supply and the demand.
yeah, fantastic. Thank you very much. Franco, adaptation in Colombia. What opportunities do you see in Colombia for investors in climate change adaptation projects? And can you share with us, I don't know, concrete examples of adaptation projects that Bancolombia has participated, has coordinated, has been, I don't know, the chief syndicator on a deal? Can you tell us a little bit of your experiences and what you want to showcase as good projects in Colombia and opportunities in Colombia?
Perfect, Rafael. We are looking in the same perspective that Elena is talking about, because it's how to manage and deal with risk. And you know, if you are, for example, buying a policy or buying some product for an insurance company, it's something that is useful if something happens with your neighbor. Because at the end you say, oh my goodness, what happened? Okay, I have the insurance product. It's not a big deal for me. But if not, it's something that you never can finish to or end to figure it out, which is the impact. So bad, you need to manage risk, and the physical risk is something that is impacting right now companies. And how to address this in order to establish the continuity of the business. This is something really relevant, and this is something that many companies are managing right now, because they understood in the bad way the impact of physical risk on climate change. They lost a lot of money on this. So maybe it's not a big business, but it's how to continue in the market. This is something that is relevant. And in other way, other activities that is just to improving or enabling other sector economy in the economy, other sectors. For example, agriculture or other activities trying to maintain the access to water in the country. We are developing different solutions. We are working in the payment for environmental services, working with communities, offering access to financial sector, and at the same time paying for protection through the ecosystem agreements, and they are protecting the ecosystem. And other companies that in a mandatory way or in a voluntary way are mobilizing resources through our trust company, and we have the specific mechanism to pay it monthly for those protections. And we are working with environmental authorities in the regions, and they are monitoring the impact of this. Habitat banks, another aspect here that is working in the same way, but in long term. Agreements for at least 20 and 30 years, and we are mobilizing resources in order to protect the environment, and this is how to maintain the water in the region, and at the same time other companies that are using the resource are just thinking in long term how to continue the business. Okay. Other more concrete about infrastructure, we are working with the sector in implementation of better standards that manage in the right way the impacts of the physical risk of climate change. Something like that is relevant in the region, not just in Colombia, because as I am saying that agriculture is something relevant in the region. Infrastructure is something relevant for the competitiveness of the region. How to work with different actors on this, and how to mobilize new solutions in the financial market, also bonds and other instruments that we need to put together, working at the same time with different sectors and our customers.
Fantastic, Franco. Yes, and so I understand, or my understanding from what you've said is that there is also an issue of continuity of business models in adaptation projects and scalability at large in projects. Yes, fantastic.
That's the way.
Sean, back to you. Right, besides thematic bonds and standards, how can the numerous things that you do in the Climate Bonds Initiative, the numerous work streams and activities, be of use to issuers, to governments, to consultants? Well, everything's useful to consultant. Can you tell us a little bit about what can you do besides setting standards for adaptation bonds to step up adaptation finance? I don't know, through advocacy actions and so on.
If there's some meaning to life other than bonds. Bonds is it. What are you talking about? Sorry, I talk a lot about bonds globally. But what are we doing with bonds? We're orienting institutional investors who are between 60 and 90% invested in bonds largely towards a different approach to asset management, to a different approach to understanding risk of their portfolios. That's fundamentally what we're doing. By linking the idea of managing risk, which is what we have to do in fixed income portfolios all the time, and proactive opportunities to climate investments, we are developing a whole skill set, a capability, an interest, an appetite for further activities across portfolios that are affected. We want investors to drive the change. Investors need to drive the change. We don't have enough bodies in our society that have a 30-year horizon or a 40-year horizon, but insurance investors and pension funds do by fiduciary duty. They have to make sure Helena's pension is paid when she leaves.
Yeah.
If they don't sort that out, they are being negligent financially. Now that is an opportunity for us in climate, in a world and a society where most of our institutions are captured by short-termism. And I say that respectfully to corporates, to governments that are dealing with short-term terms. Look at what's happened in Spain with politics overwhelming everything else. It's hard to maintain a long-term agenda when you've got to deal with the short-term agenda. So that's one of the things we're doing here. On the back of that comes this understanding across all infrastructure, investment sectors, corporate sectors, about the fact that we need to start addressing a material risk factor for investors, a material risk factor. And that drives an appreciation of stuff we've got to do. Now, you know, when you're buried in the space, you think this is bog obvious. You know, Branko's buried in the space. It's bog obvious. But the truth is, it isn't to everyone. By making it material to investment and to financial returns and to financial capital flowing, we bring it home in a way that we haven't been able to so far. And that's really what we're trying to do. So we work on guidance, we work on incentives, on how governments or central banks can tilt the playing field to mitigate risk, to ensure future financial stability, and all of these things. I mean, look at the work that's been happening in countries around the world. In this audience, we have a friend from the Japanese regulator who's been working on disclosing risk in the Japanese system with a specific desire to increase in understanding what we've got to do to improve financial stability going forward. That's the game. That's what this is all about at the end of the day. Taxonomy is just a core central baseline tool in this area.
Yeah, fantastic. Yes, yeah, Sean, and I agree completely with you. I think that, well, besides the fiduciary duties and obligations that we all have, there's also a question of capacity building and generating that appetite. And it's so fantastic. Thank you very much. Roman, back to you. So in terms, well, you've talked about the objectives that the EIB as a group has in terms of adaptation finance. And in terms of asset allocation, how does the EIB pursue investment opportunities in development and deployment of climate resilient technologies, products, services? What's the story behind that? And what perception do you have as a multilateral lender or Europe's great public bank in through stepping up investments through thematic bonds or specially dedicated facilities that cater for adaptation?
Okay, thanks for the question. So let me come back on Helena's point. In terms of party invitations, we're doing fine. But in terms of our adaptation target, we really have a lot of work to do. And that's why we've came forward with an adaptation plan, a dedicated adaptation plan for the EIB. First time we ever did this in the bank. And of course it includes the target, but it breaks down to you how we are trying to achieve the target, what we are putting in place in order to support us and our clients to achieve the target. So please go to our website. It's available there. You'll find it easily. Have a look and be in touch with us about it. So on the concrete measures that we are doing, first of all, we have created a technical assistance and advisory platform. We've already have that operational for inside in the EU. We call it Adapt. And that is available to all our clients, public and private sector. And through that, we are leveraging commission finance for advisory to help develop projects for adaptation, and put the necessary risk assessments in place, etc. And you really have expertise on your side when you prepare the project. And that's available at the moment. So if that's interesting to anybody, you can be in touch with us. We are also using our existing partnerships to make that available outside of the EU. We have some modest TA and advisory services to countries outside of the EU, and we're trying to ramp this up in the future. Really because we agree, we see a challenge in understanding exactly what adaptation means in the project context. No. Certainly in infrastructure, which is something we do a lot in the EIB, but also in developing services in innovation, research and development. That's something that we really also want to target. We're also trying to help through our partnerships to provide the right data to translate, information about that comes from climate modeling, translate that into engineering and financial decision making. Something that's very new for the bank. And we have a partnership with Copernicus Climate Service in the EU that we're extending to our clients, and we are looking at increasing our ecosystem of partnerships in the future to get better and better at this over time. We also have changed our risk appetite specifically for the most vulnerable countries globally. So including least developed countries, small island development states, fragile country contexts, where we can finance up to 100% of dedicated adaptation projects, so that co-financing requirements are not delaying or basically killing the project development process, and the EIB can really respond quickly. Yes, with that, on GGBI, can only speak for EIB, not the other participating banks. But we're absolutely open-minded to have that conversation. Very interested to explore that, and on a general point, we're really also looking into all our financial products to see how we can tweak them to better fit adaptation, and really scale up the financing and meet the target in the end.
Fantastic. I'll pick up the gauntlet and we'll have that conversation on GGBI, because I think it's interesting. And, I think a couple of takeaways that I took, Roman, from what you said is, capacity building, and also linking it with de-risking projects in adaptation, which I think is a crux. It's going to be a very good incentive going on forward for not only for project promoters, but for providers of finance. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to ask you more questions, but I'm afraid we're going to be kicked out. And we've got the main dessert coming up, which is Gunther Tallinger is going to give us a very special address on adaptation and the insurance company sector. So Gunther, off you go. Please come here and stun us with your knowledge and close off the panel, please.
Good. Does that work? I hope so. Jean, I know you didn't mean it that way, but I must admit, I do believe adaptation is really a very, very tricky thing, if not even almost a horrible tricky thing. Just a very quick example that we go back to what is actually this thing, an insurance. Many people may have, let's say, kind of the similar risk. They may own a car, or they may own a house, and they simply fear a little bit that the house burns down or some other fire happens. And that's why they actually come together and they simply say, okay, if we put a little bit of money into one pool, then that pool can actually help us, at least those ones where there's really a fire in the house. Everybody understands this. The risk needs to be diversified. And an insurance company does nothing special. And actually, an insurance company provides this platform so that many people can come together and can make sure that these risks are in a diversified form managed. Now, coming very much to Franco's point, now assume physical risk go up. So you have not only a few of those house owners who have a fire in their house, but you have actually a substantial number of those house owners who have a fire in their house. How is the pool now going to work? That's the tricky thing with adaptation. If you have, let's say, climate change coming in, and you have then these, let's say, these weather phenomena, and that weather phenomena start to raise the physical risk, then all of a sudden this whole idea of we come together because we can diversify no longer works. That's why I honestly believe, and I do understand you talk about adaptation, why I honestly believe mitigation is actually much, much easier. Because at a certain point in time, once the physical risk is so extreme that we can no longer talk about insurance, what do you do as a house owner? Let's assume you are not a house owner yet. You are a little bit more, let's say, younger generation. You want to have something to live in. Therefore, you are reaching out to a bank and you want to talk with that bank about financing of your house. But you also put a little bit your own money into that house. And then you talk with the bank and the bank says, yeah, no, absolutely no problem. But of course, you have insurance, don't you? Well, no insurance, no financing. And then perhaps you yourself also would say, okay, why should I actually put my own private assets, let's say the money that I saved, into that house if I can't insure it? So that's where we actually need to come from. That's why mitigation actually is much, let's say, easier perhaps than adaptation. But adaptation is the topic. So let me talk about adaptation. And adaptation is an insurance company. First, clearly, an insurer should really give advice on risk. What does that mean? Be really out there, provide what does the data tell us? How does actually a certain form of risk pattern evolve? What should people do with, let's say, this risk pattern evolving? And how could they actually start to use this knowledge to not take this risk in a certain a peculiar form? That people would say is an easy thing. Actually, for insurance companies, not so trivial, because you need to actually go into the databases that you have. That needs to be really enhanced and extended. Your communication needs to be really, let's say, up the ante, because you need to reach your, let's say, so-called policyholders, your customers, not only when they already have an issue, no, very well before they have an issue. It's very similar in a second group of topics that an insurance company can do, which is called risk mitigation, where, let's say, an insurance company gives really immediate form of information. Like, for instance, there's a hailstorm, get your car underneath of a roof. This type of information. You can do this, let's say, for many risks. Insurance companies clearly can do this, can cooperate, but this is also some form of adaptation, because we need to say, at least in the last 2 years in Europe, in this so-called hail corridor, you know, the insurers think about where can hail actually occur. That's a hail corridor in a country. There's much more hail that we have seen before. So it's really a helpful form of, let's say, working with those who own the risk in the end. Another very important point is that an insurance company can, of course, think about different forms of products. There's, for instance, the notion out there of so-called parametric risk. What does that insurance, what does that do? It actually works on the basis of a trigger, like there is a storm, and because there was a storm, you get money. Why is that helpful? Because in many cases, these natural catastrophes reach so many people that actually the normal form of let us assess the loss, the damage and so on takes too long, and such a, let's say, immediate trigger gives money to those people, and they can actually work with this fairly quickly. Complements actually other insurance coverage as it is out there. And then there is, of course, a topic that is always discussed, which is let's increase the risk-bearing capacity. Cyclone pool in Australia. What is that? The government actually says, okay, we also come in with capital. What is that? Taxpayers' money, of course. We come in with capital and kind of complement the capital that is already available for that particular risk from the capital markets. And with this, we can increase the risk-bearing capacity. Does that work well? Yes, it does. But we need to be very honest. What is this truly? It is not that we have made great strategic decisions and now we are in a position where we just have to live through and therefore we have to increase the risk-bearing capacity. No. We actually made bad strategic decisions, and this is why now all of a sudden, let's say the capital market that formerly with the insurance industry provided the capacity needs to go to governments and say, okay, how can we expand? This is actually what happened. Who made the bad strategic decisions? Well, we all together, because we actually formed the economy as it is, and that economy actually is driving these forms of physical risks as we have it. And that's why we actually need to talk so much about mitigation. I'll come to this in a minute. Just let's say back on this pool topic. The pooling, the making the risk-bearing capacity bigger is only buying us time. It's very important. We make it bigger because, let's say, we get governments actually to also cover some risk. This gives us time to understand what risks actually are evolving and what risks we can no longer take. This expansion of the risk-bearing capacity, again back to adaptation, for instance, is to help to address house owners who now learn that their 30-year-old house is all of a sudden in a flat brown zone. That's what they learn. They never were in a flat brown zone. It's just that now the weather, let's say, that we see all of a sudden says, okay, this is now a flat brown zone. And this house owner needs risk-bearing capacity that the house owner doesn't get so easily from the insurance industry. That's where the government all of a sudden needs to come in. But this is only buying time, only buying time. Why is that? Because we have, of course, our form of climate change that is continuing to, let's say, worsen the weather phenomena, even if we would be able to stop now. And we don't. So even if we would stop now, then it would still increase in terms of worsening physical risks. So that brings me again back to, yes, insurance companies can do a lot on adaptation. It's very good to have regulation, by the way. It's very good to have regulation because regulation really guides this financial industry. And we have just heard at the beginning of this COP that some financial players have these interesting ideas that they can announce targets, then they can drop targets, then they can talk about other targets. Therefore, regulation is very good to have because this gives very clear guidance. And we on the financial industry side, we are very sure that regulation is not going to get away. And by the way, we can also not simply say, okay, we don't follow it. So regulation is very helpful. Taxonomy also helps, at least in the European Union, with the adaptation program. But to finish, mitigation is something that insurance companies also need to do, in particular as investors. As investors, they need to do, and they are very willing to do so. There are many insurers who came together in, let's say, alliances. Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance is such a thing, where they clearly commit to emission reduction because they want to really work on mitigation to make adaptation still possible. That was it. Thank you.
Fantastic, Gunther. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 3 minutes for the panel remaining. So unless you have a question you want to raise to some of the panelists, we do have questions. Please, madam, if you can begin.
Yeah, it's actually to the last speaker. Do you also see a role for insurance also as an investor in adaptation, not only in mitigation?
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. This is clearly, and I think Jean has made very wonderful examples, and also from the EIB have clearly heard what can be done, and that is actually one of the parts of, let's say, the mitigation program as such. It can really be interwoven. Both. An investor can actually do with investments both, can work on mitigation and adaptation. Yeah.
Fantastic. And the gentleman over there.
Thank you. I'm Marcio Viegas at Sustain. We did a research for WWF requested by the Minister of Ecological Transition in Spain. And one of the conclusions is that there is very little private investment as discussed here. And my question is a provocation to Sean and to you. If it's that easy, why there is so little bonds related to adaptation? And then back to you, how do you, what the two barriers we found is that first, adaptation projects are very low ticket, and second, how do you bring forward costs that may be avoided in the future? And that may be a tricky question. You may have the answer or the formula or the model. Thank you.
You're my senior, sir, please. Everyone wants to hear what Allianz says. Well, I will simply say, of course, it's easy if we understand how we manage risk and the climate. If we bring the science into the room, it becomes easy. But we have not been doing that. That's why it's not happening. We have not been bringing the science into the room. For 30 years, our scientists have been telling us climate change is happening, we have to act. For 30 years, we've been saying, oh, it's terrible. What about we just do this? That's all right, isn't it? And it isn't. Now, as long as we channel the science, understand, listen, and bring it into our infrastructure decisions, our investment decisions, our building decisions, our national expenditures, it is easy at that point. And at that point, we'll make Roman's life a lot easier.
Fantastic.
Yeah, you are right. it is easy if we follow what Jean says. We need to, of course, also be ready as investors to go, let's say, all ticket sizes, and that, of course, requires that we also have, let's say, a little bit of different forms of underwriting processes. Quite clearly, the normal, let's say, sitting and waiting, something like, and by the way, I'm responsible for investment management at Allianz. That's actually my job. The normal approach of let us sit in, let's say, in London, in New York, or Singapore, or wherever, and wait for the projects to come leads to the situation that you describe. Investors need to follow the model, that they take up the guidance that is there and develop, of course, their capabilities so that they can go into, let's say, investing into adaptation. And that is what is really needed. So it's not that investors could say, we are, let's say, across the board ready. There is quite some work that investors need to do still to then not have the picture that you describe.
It's not easy, I agree. Thank you very much, Gunther, Sean. Ladies and gentlemen, I have to pull the plug because they've got to prepare for the next panel. So I don't want to get on our hostesses' bad graces. So thank you very much. Yes, sorry. I've been instructed to tell you that there's a specific event at 5:30 on insurance and reinsurance and adaptation here at the Spanish Pavilion, right? So if you're interested and if you've got free time and you want to have coffee with us after or before, please come here at 5:30. Thank you very much.
Thank you.